that is use it more.
This button.
Okay.
And as they're talking.
I would like to call the special call meeting for Fairfield County Council to order Tuesday, June the 27th, 2023 at 3 p.m. Next, we are down to approval of the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Let the record reflect 5-0 on approval of the agenda. Next, we are down to invocation. Councilman Roof.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for another beautiful day you've given us. We thank you for all the councilmen and the administration here and all the citizens that with so many concerns for this county, Lord, and we just ask that you guide and direct us in all we do, that everything will be to your glory and not ours. Lord, we just ask that guide us through this audit presentation, and as we leave this place, give everyone safe travels and mercies back to their respective homes. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Roof. Next, we are down to presentations. A, 2022 audit presentation. And I want to say thank you for being here. Glad we are here at this moment, and I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, well, thank y'all for having me. I know everybody's kind of relieved to have this finalized and ultimately presented so we can move on. But before I start, I just want to mention a couple of things. So I think in front of you, you should ultimately have what I'm going to call 3 separate documents. One is the county's audited financial statements themselves. It says annual financial report on the front. The second, you'll notice, has a picture of the state capitol building on the front, and that's just kind of a stock photo we use, but we call this our auditor's discussion and analysis, and I'm ultimately going to spend the most of my time in that document as we go through things. And again, I'm not going to try to take up too much of your time, but try to give you a good idea of where things are in terms of financial highlights, in terms of the audit itself, issues relative to its performance, things of that nature. And then the third and final document is just a stapled document, which we call our management letter. It's on our letterhead addressed to you all. And this just includes recommendations. So that's all. These are not internal control deficiencies necessarily. These are just what we would call, if you don't want to call them recommendations, call them best practices in our view to communicate to you all. So I'll spend a little bit of time in each of them. But first and foremost, I'm going to go into the annual financial report. And
Can I stop you for 1 minute?
Sure, yes,
And
sir.
I apologize to interrupt, and I'm sorry for not having your name in front of me to recognize who you are and what firm you are with.
I should have said that.
If you can do that for the record for me.
I'm sorry, I should have said that. My name is Grant Davis. I'm a partner in the Columbia office of Malden and Jenkins CPAs. So again, I'm going to refer to a few things in the annual financial report itself. Just after the table of contents in that document on page number 1, you'll see our independent auditor's report. This is the first of 3 reports that have been issued in this document. And this is our opinion on the financial statements. You can see it's front and center on that page number 1. And we've ultimately issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements of the county, which is not glamorous language, but it's really the only acceptable result in a financial statement audit. So again, that's a clean opinion on the financial statements. And we're in this document, if you're following along here, the annual financial report. Just beyond that, we'll get into the financial statements. But before that, I'm going to switch gears on you again and move a little bit into the audit issues before we kind of talk about financial highlights and things of that nature. So that's really going to be in this document here, our auditor's discussion analysis document. The first several pages of that talk about who we are as a firm. So just to familiarize yourself, if you're not already, about our governmental practice and things of that nature. Beyond that, we get into some financial highlights. Really beginning on page number 5. You can see the title heading, Overview of the Financial Statements. And I'm just going to kind of walk through a few of these things with you. If you were to look in the annual financial report, you'll see these same numbers. Of course, we're obviously rounding here. But total assets of the county, $178 million at the end of the year, versus liabilities of about $74 million. This gives us net position or equity, which is ultimately a little bit different than fund balance, but net position or equity of $104 million at the end of the year. And this includes all the activities of Fairfield County, all the various funds all rolled up. This also includes capital assets. It also includes long-term debt in the form of outstanding bonds. It includes pension liability and things of that nature. So all of that's kind of big picture. These are your big bullets. $178 million in assets, $74 million in liabilities, $104 million in net position or equity. Net position, if you flip to page 6, net position is comprised really of 3 elements. There's an element that's called the net investment in capital assets, which is what it sounds like. It's your capital assets, that's your infrastructure, your buildings, things of that nature reduced by accumulated depreciation. minus any outstanding debt that was used to acquire those assets. So that's the big chunk of what your overall equity position or net position is. And then there's a restricted portion of $11 million. Those are restricted by state law or bond ordinance or whatever the case may be. And that gives you an unrestricted deficit or a negative number, and unrestricted of $41 million. Now the reason for that, the primary reason I should say, for that deficit of $41 million is the accounting for your pension liability that's administered by the state and your other post-employment benefits liability, which is in the form of retiree health insurance. Those two numbers were relatively recently added on in accordance with governmental accounting standards. I think the pension standard began in 2015. The other post-employment benefits about 2018. So those numbers were never previously quantified and reported on your balance sheet until those time periods. So what that ultimately did was to take a big hit to your net position, your overall equity total. And of course, on the pension side, that's managed by the state of South Carolina. The only responsibility the county has is to make the monthly contributions as a percentage of employee salaries. So again, that is what is driving that number. So I mentioned that just to say, if you see this big negative number of $41 million on your statement of net position, it should not be, in my mind, a cause for concern. I mean, it is very much comparable to other counties in the state that also have to record the exact same pension liability. On page 7, we get into the general fund a little bit. And I'm not going to go through this other than to say we've got some charts here, and you can see basically the first one is how your revenues break down in this pie chart. So you can see the largest portion of the revenues of the general fund are derived from property taxes, which should not be surprising, but ultimately that's the big piece there. You'll also see here a very small portion of almost $2 million, $1.975 million here in its own little slice. That was the general fund's portion of the Dominion settlement. That's also recorded in this pie chart. So you can see the breakout of the general fund's revenues there. The second table, as it says, is general fund's expenditures, and you can see there are kind of three big buckets there of expenditures. There's the 9.9 million is general government. That's things like administration, finance, all of those general governmental type activities, those departments that fit that nature. And then public safety is obviously going to be your sheriff's department and other relevant departments there. And then the third is the health and welfare. So those are your three sort of big buckets of expenditures. And then you can see there are other various ones. Debt service is ultimately pretty small, so forth and so on. I will say, just for a sort of a discussion's sake, public safety is generally always a big piece of the pie in a county government. And even in city governments for most extent. So that none of that is surprising to me. I just highlight that so you can see, these are where the monies are going by their functional areas, what we call that. Page number 8, we get into kind of some historical information. I just thought it would be helpful for you all to see this. None of this is required to do, but you can see basically your gold bars going back to 2017 are your inflows in the general fund. So that's revenues, that's transfers in from other funds, things of that nature. Your green bars are your expenditures and transfers out to other funds, things of that nature. So you can just see over time, all right, have our inflows exceeded our outflows or vice versa. Again, that's just there for your own sake. And then the chart right below it shows the change in the fund balance of the general fund for the last 6 years. So you can see it has gone up some years and it has gone down some years, probably for a variety of reasons. This year, 2022, the general fund's fund balance increased by $2.17 million. And of course, I just mentioned this a moment ago, but there's a portion of the Dominion settlement included in the general fund this year. So that would ultimately have a piece of the reason for why that increased. On page number 9, this is kind of the last, I don't want to chart you to death. The page number 9 is kind of the last one I wanted to bring up. And really what we're looking at here is expenditures versus fund balance. And this is only in the general fund. So when the lines are close together, your general fund expenditures basically are close to what your general fund balance is. When the lines move farther apart, your expenditures are getting higher and higher and higher relative to your fund balance. So your fund balance may be shrinking or staying stagnant while your expenditures are going up. So as you can see, kind of beginning in 18, the fund balance has been dropping largely while expenditures have been moving up. Nothing drastic in expenditures. I mean, if you look at the totals, they're 26 million, 28, 29, 31, 32, 32. So a steady increase in the expenditures of the general fund. And the percentages at the bottom of this page are trying to reflect what's going on in this chart. So the higher the percentage, the closer to 100% means that you have fund balance on hand to cover 100% of your expenditures. As the number reduces, that means you have less fund balance on hand to cover your expenditures. So a very simple mathematical equation would be to take your 2022 expenditures and divide them by 365 days or by 12 months to figure out how much does the general fund spend a month, and then apply that to your fund balance, and that'll tell you how many months of fund balance you have at June 30th. So the little paragraph right below this chart indicates that the county had 6 months of fund balance on hand at the end of 2022. Now that is not unassigned fund balance. That includes, and I'll talk about this in a moment too, it includes several categories or classifications of fund balance. Not all are available for spending, but the total fund balance of the general fund is about 190 days of operations. Now, looking at it as a whole, that's a pretty good place to be. You think about, we just talked about what your major revenue source was, which was property taxes. If you think about your property tax calendar, most of that's being paid December, January, February. So to be at June in your calendar and have essentially 6 months of operations, that takes you back around to when you need to collect your property taxes again. So again, that's not a bad place to be. The Government Finance Officers Association provides a little bit of guidance for governments, and when I say a little bit, it's very difficult to say in any specific government this is the dollar amount that you should have, just because there's a variety of differences among governments, even counties within the state. But as a general guideline, somewhere between 3 and 6 months is a good place to be. But the nuance to that is to figure out what is the unassigned fund balance. And I'll talk about that in a moment as we think about that. But again, you can see general fund expenditures 32 million versus fund balance of 18 million in 2022 in this chart. Beyond that, page 10 going on for a couple of pages here talks about the rest of the financial statements, the funds of the county, the footnotes, what those are. Page 12 starts what I'm going to call the compliance section. We have ultimately issued 3 reports in the audited financial statements of the county. The first one was the very first thing I talked about, the independent auditor's report. The second was what we call our Yellow Book report. It's a report on internal controls and compliance with laws, regulations, grant agreements, so forth and so on. It is not designed to offer an opinion, but to provide what we call negative assurance, which means if we note any instances of noncompliance, whatever their nature, then we have to report that to you all, whether they're material or not. We had one instance of basically internal control deficiency that I'll call it. And I'm going to say one because it ultimately would have been pages and pages and pages of detail had we not just condensed it all into one. And I'll talk about it in a moment. The third and final report is our single audit report. So anytime you spend over $750,000 in federal monies, it triggers a compliance audit specific to federal spending. The county did spend over $750,000 in federal money in fiscal year 22, so we had to perform a compliance audit on the spending of those monies. We tested the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds program out of the ARPA legislation. We didn't have any instances of noncompliance or internal control deficiencies relative to that program. So it's a clean opinion on the single audit side or the federal spending, which is very positive. Beyond that, you get into the section, page 13, that's what we call our required communications. I'm not going to read all this to you, but it talks about the audit process. It talks about the fact that we are required to be independent of the county and its component units and related organizations. We are independent of the county. We didn't have ultimately any disagreements with management that precluded us from issuing our audit, obviously, since we're here today. We didn't have any uncorrected misstatements. These are all memorialized in the pages that follow here. And again, I'm not going to read every one of them to you. But page 16, we get into basically what we consider to be a finding. An internal control deficiency, which I mentioned before was disclosed in that Yellow Book report. And we titled this Financial Close and Reporting. And again, I'm not going to read you the entire verbiage, but basically we all know that the audit has taken a long time to complete. And if you flip to page 17, you can see the condition bolded here. And again, I'm not going to read, I'll let you read it on your own there, but ultimately, we had an issue with properly maintained general ledgers, which includes all the general ledger and ultimately sub-ledgers include all the financial data of the county. To the tune of, we posted $95.8 million in adjustments from when we first started the audit to when it was finished. And that's noted here, and that was across 25 different county funds. So that includes the general fund and then 24 others. And all of that aggregated together was $95.5 million of adjusting. That means your assets, your liabilities, your revenues, your expenditures, all of these items were ultimately adjusted up and down and back and forth from when we first started in September to where we are today. So that is the story, at least in my mind, behind the late conclusion of the audit to this point. We have a recommendation. It is not in great detail by design. We generally don't go into pages and pages and pages of recommendations on how to correct this in written documentation, but I would just say Ms. Johnson has worked diligently over the last months to really get us to this point today. So I feel positive about the future relative to that and to the audit process and its future timeliness. And at the end of the day, the county's audit should not take a significant amount of time. Fairfield County is just not an enormous county with crazy financial transactions. I mean, it really should not take that long. In fact, we budgeted for the audit to take about 350 hours. When I looked at it yesterday, it had, on our time, it had 1,200 hours in it. So that's about, 3.5 times what it ultimately should have. And a lot of that, like I said, is the story here is the $95.8 million in adjusting up and forward, back and forth, back and forth to get everything recorded. So that's the bad news on the compliance side. I mean, ultimately, again, we've issued a clean opinion. We are saying in our auditor's report that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. So it's a clean opinion that you should have confidence in the numbers as they're presented. But we do have this one, what we call an internal control deficiency, this finding, and that's also included at the very back at the conclusion of the audited financial statements. The verbiage is the exact same. I've just copied it in here so you can have it to look at. Page 18, we've got a couple of recommendations. These are what we call management points. This is in that stapled management letter. Again, these are just copied over here. General accounting qualitative analysis is basically, there's a lot of information available to county staff. We're just encouraging county staff to learn it and use it to help not only facilitate the annual audit process, but a number of other processes that derive both financial information that's ultimately quantitative and then just general qualitative information. What we got in this case, we got a settlement from Dominion. Why is none of it recorded? That type of thing, big picture type stuff. Financial information, the second one there is, and I think Ms. Johnson indicated that you all have begun receiving financial reports on a monthly basis. This is just that recommendation. It was not evident during the fiscal year, so we included it here. That's great if that's already been implemented. We do encourage that monthly. Some places do quarterly, but I would really encourage it monthly. And that's what we've indicated here. And then the third is employee cross-training. And, coming out of COVID, I'll just say this, coming out of the COVID environment, a lot of finance people across the state left for whatever reason. They went and moved somewhere, they took a different job, they retired, whatever the case may be. And when I looked on the state treasurer's website yesterday, there are, I think, 6 counties that have not submitted their audit to the state as of yesterday. Fairfield was one of those. Of course, we have it today. We can do it today, so there'll be 5. But and they're all rural counties. And I think what you ultimately have is a combination of governmental accounting is very, very different than private sector accounting. And you look at your financial statements, they don't look like anything else that you'll see anywhere else in the world. I mean, the statement of activities, if you flip through this, is just a bizarre statement to try to figure out what's going on in there. But that's the nature of it. And I think that there is a notable issue nationwide, not just in South Carolina, with finding qualified people who have the knowledge to do governmental accounting. So you've got that kind of issue there. And basically what this third recommendation is that for the people that you do have, we need to make sure that they are appropriately cross-trained. So in the event that you have a situation where someone leaves, that somebody else in the office can pick things up and at least keep you all informed with the monthly financial data, and then keep the ledgers moving. Keep the general ledger should be closed out on a monthly basis. Bank account should be reconciled on a monthly basis, all those things like that. So that cross-training is just kind of encompassing the whole concept of we need to have sort of a next person up mentality in our training of the people who are working relative to finance. So those are the three recommendations that we have here. Beyond that, pages 19 and following, we talk about some new accounting standards. Like I just said, governmental accounting was complex. If you have insomnia, you can read what we have written about all the upcoming accounting standards and their potential impact on the county and when they're required to be implemented. This is just a brief excerpt to give you the nature of those. It's not getting any easier, I'll put it to you like that. And then just after that, I have to admit, we have a brief commercial we have a governmental advisory practice. We do a lot of work in our advisory practice. Those guys can really do just about anything. They are separate from the audit side, so we don't have independence issues, but we've just put it in there because, to be honest with you, we've had a lot of people who have come to us and say, can you do this or can you do that? And we're happy to say, for the most part, yeah, we can. We can help you do just about anything. So you have to forgive us for that brief commercial. But I will mention one other thing about the general fund's fund balance. If you open up the audited financial statements, the thicker of the three, I'm just going to refer to this page number, and you'll have to turn it sort of sideways here, but page 14 of that is the balance sheet of the general fund and the other governmental type funds of the county. And if you look at the bottom section on the left-hand side, you'll see general fund in the heading, and then you obviously just follow down. General fund balance, $18 million, and you can see that's broken up in a number of different categories. 6.8 of that is unassigned. So basically a third of the total is unassigned. So if you were to do the math that we were talking about earlier with having essentially 190 days or 6 months of fund balance on hand, you cut that down by a third. And that's really what is available to be spent by the county at June 30. So you've gone from 6 months in total fund balance to 2.5, something like that, 2.5 months of fund balance. So that's a little bit lean. Like I said, GFOA, I think the Government Finance Officers Association generally recommends a benchmark of about three months on hand of unassigned fund balance relative to your spending, to the general fund spending. So anyway, it's not an awful place to be. You're certainly not an outlier there, I will say that, with the clients that we work with in the state. But again, certainly it is not, I will say, it is not too much. You don't have too much unassigned fund balance for your operations. I also don't know that you have a scary too little amount, something that would be concerning on the too little. So, I mean, I think ultimately you would want to live somewhere in that 3 to 6 months of unassigned fund balance for your operations based on your budgeted expenditures. So, I meant to say this before, but if y'all have any questions, I meant for you to holler out as we were going, but I'd be happy to try to answer any if you do have any.
How did we get down to 2.5 months?
Spending, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Do you know what you had in 21? Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the unassigned fund, without looking at the document, I don't know what the unassigned, and again, like I said, unassigned is really what you want to key in on because it's not restricted by state law or anything like that. It's not committed by this body or assigned or anything like that. Those are the components: restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Unassigned is basically, it's not in a pot over here to be used in this way. It is available to meet the operations of the county. So I don't know. I can't answer that part.
So we're 2.5 months, that's all we got in the pocket.
In unassigned fund balance, yes, ma'am. So basically, to meet the needs of the county at June 30, 22. Yeah, like I said, GFOA would recommend at least 3, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think, like I said, you have to think about the calendar of your revenues, kind of think about your cash flows. And, to be at June 30 and have 2 or 3 months, that takes you through September. And then you've got to get back around to December, basically, before you get your big sort of cash inflow. I mean, that's just the way property taxes work. Now, there are a number of revenues that come in on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. A lot of the intergovernmental revenues from the state of South Carolina, sales tax is generally monthly, I believe. Like the local option sales tax, the local aid to subdivisions, I believe, is quarterly. So, I mean, there are some cash flows still coming in outside of that late in the year, early in the year time frame, but that's when the bulk of it is. And your expenditures are not all in December, January. I mean, they're relatively ratably throughout the year. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that, in my mind, the benchmark that I usually suggest is in line with GFOA. If you're at June 30, it'd be great if you can get to 6 months.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, and obviously you've made a lot of corrections and things are going to be addressed and changed. What is the plan going forward so that we're going to be done with this
Not in June.
by the end of December? So we're not doing this again? Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure y'all discussed that.
Yeah, I think Ms. Johnson and I are both happy to just get this one done.
I know that everybody is.
We'll take it. She told me on the way down here, she said, all right, and after you present this, y'all start again tomorrow. I'm not prepared to do that yet, but I do need a break a little bit. But yeah, no, our general process that I would just say this, we audit 18 counties in South Carolina. Most of those are done by December 31st. There are a few that are still on the delinquent auditors list. We started a couple of them in April. So, I mean, they had a lot of the similar issues. They had people leave or whatever the case may be. We really don't want to start until the numbers stop moving. I mean, I think as you can imagine, it's very difficult to audit what we call a moving target. If the numbers keep moving, then nothing's getting done on our side. We can't finish. And a lot of that ultimately stems in the high hours we ultimately had in the audit this year. But, we had a good plan last year. We met in May of last year to talk about sort of the plan forward because we were new auditors of the county. We wanted to develop a plan. We started in September and, left in September, came back in November, left in November, came back in January, February, something like that. And have continued to plug away on it. So we never forgot about y'all. I don't want you to think that. It's just it was obviously, I mean, for lack of a better word, it was a mess. So yeah, I mean, I think the real key to financial reporting, not auditing. Auditing's our problem. Financial reporting is the county's problem or the county's role in this process. And the key is to have a monthly closeout, to make sure that you keep up, or the personnel involved keep up with this, not just at the end of the year, but throughout the year. It's a process. I mean, that's really what we want to get at. The financial reporting is a process that doesn't start and stop in September through December. It goes on throughout the year, and I think that's the key. But I have very much confidence in Ms. Johnson, her abilities, for the very simple fact that she was able to get us here, to get us to these numbers. So anyway, I do think there are a number of things that if you were to look back over the past year that would be good to change. But I also don't know exactly what has changed since June 30, 2022 relative to processes and things like that. So certainly it'd be something that we would want, that we will discuss ultimately and develop another good audit plan. We don't do audits without having a good audit plan, and with both sides buying into that. We certainly don't want to force anybody to be audited if they're not ready. So we'll certainly work on that.
all day long, 100 million.
It is quite a lot. It's more than I have ever seen in terms of adjusting.
100 million, think about that. Was that everything we had on the books? Was that all the books?
I think we took it all off and put it all back on.
It reversed it again and 2 more times.
Yeah.
Have you ever had anything like that before?
Not to that extent, no, ma'am. I mean, when we wrote the finding, the internal control deficiency, I mean, I could have written that in 10 findings. I could have had you 15 pages of findings. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of point in that to me. I mean, technically for each transaction cycle, so you think about your financial statements, your cash, your receivables, payables, revenues. I could have written one for each one of those and then tried to do that, but I thought the number was enough. The 95.8 million is enough to try to convey the significance ultimately of the effort it was to get everything recorded and closed. And it is significant. I've seen some pretty awful audits over the last 11 years, but I haven't seen any that approach that dollar amount in adjusting.
Was that just because it wasn't done every month like it should have been done, or what? They were put in the wrong spot, or what would you say
have
the
thoughts?
problem is?
Yeah. Well, it was various different reasons. First of all, there was several bank accounts that had already been opened. Like Mr. Davis said, some of it was the Dominion monies, and it was just those amounts were in a bank, in escrow accounts. They were just not recorded on the books. For example, as I told you in the past, it was sewer monies. It was some bond monies. They just weren't recorded. And I can't tell you the reason why. We just knew as a team we needed to go in, find all these transactions. And our sole purpose, Ms. Mosey is our interim finance director, and, I applaud her for sticking in there to do all of this, because it was a lot. Every time we thought we were near done, and then she found another document, it's like, we got to post it. And sometimes we would find one bank statement, and we had to do reconciliations from the date of that bank account was open all the way to June. And then most of the time it was further out than June. We just had to let's get June from December to June or whatever else so we can at least get this audit processed and then catch up from July on. So we just know we found a lot of transactions. We can't tell you the reason why those transactions were never reported, never reconciled. So, but I want to applaud again Miss Beverly Mosey for sticking in there with us, and I want to also acknowledge some of the finance team that's back there. They've always been willing to help, ready to get trained in different areas in the finance department, and so that's why they're here today, because they wanted to attend, they wanted to hear, and to see what they can do to help with this process. So I want to thank them as well.
Ms. Green.
Again, I have to certainly applaud the finance team. And Laura, I tell you, you've done an excellent job, Nithya and the other people who've helped to support all of this effort. I think that a lot of it is going back to training and, of course, staffing and taking a look at both who's kind of responsible. Does the state have training sessions for our staff and others, or, South Carolina Association of Counties, or who's basically helping in those training efforts for the governmental finance director?
We attend GFOA conferences, and they keep us up to date on a lot of upcoming requirements. We also deal with our auditors at the same time. And I'm sorry, I forgot about Ms. Sunithio here. She took over the heavy lifting while we were on this course, and then she took over my phone calls and everything else. You handle this, I'll take over the rest. You're done. But yes, there are classes, and we've already had maybe 2 training class in-house training with our finance staff. I think it was probably 1 to 2 hours worth of training each time, but we plan on having some more. One of the things I've learned, and it helped me out over the last, a lot of years, 30 plus years, is that if you understand what you're doing and the importance of it, and understand how when you enter this data into a system, the effects it has all the way across, you tend to pay more attention to what you're doing and take it more seriously rather than a person just sitting there like, I'm just entering invoices. If you understand when you enter this invoice, this is what happens and this is how it affects the financial statement. I think it helps with training and it helps them understand more, because even with the 2 trainings that we had, I mean, the accounting staff was like very excited about it, and some of them started over talking me like, that's an error right there, So I taught them, like, if this is a negative, there's a problem, and then and they've learned to drill down to find errors on their own and stuff. And so again, in-house training and some external training is going to be going on as well.
And then the second part to that, it seems as if the use of the data that we already have, or I should say maybe the use of the systems that we currently use and what they're able to do seems to also be an issue that is throughout this.
The system, first of all, I know sometimes comments been made about, our software system, maybe it needs to be looked at. It's an excellent system. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. If you put wrong information in, what are you going to get? Wrong information. So it's about the user and what information is put in. And there are several different type of reports that can be run that you can go as detailed as you want to go. And so we're exposing staff, even though it's not their job to look at this report, we're exposing them to different type of reports so they can look at it. And sometimes we're going to get to the point of running reports for them and say, here, figure it out, tell me what's wrong with it, and let them drill down into the system, because it's a learning tool. It helps them to learn to figure out where the problem is and also how to correct it. So this system that we had it for a number of years, but it's up to date. And it has so many different types of reports in there. We can just do so many things with it.
I would just mention on the training element, and again, I'm not trying to give y'all a commercial or anything, but on page 27, we do free quarterly newsletters and free training to our clients, and it's virtual. So the training is virtual. We have, historically it was in person. Post-COVID, we've ultimately begun to do that over Zoom, but we'll have 300 or 400 people attend virtually to our quarterly sessions. We try to offer 2 a quarter just so people that have conflicts can come. And like I said, we still send out newsletters, and you can see some of the topics there. And the reason I mention it here as well is that if you all are interested in being in part of it, you can certainly get on our listserv and do that. We make that available to the governing body as well as the staff. So I just mentioned that.
Anybody else? Well, Mr. Davis, I certainly want to say I appreciate you and your firm working with Fairfield County and Ms. Johnson and the finance team to get this audit complete. It is something that all of this council has been waiting on for a long time. I said it last night at the council meeting, and I'll say it again. I want to thank Ms. Johnson, Ms. Williams, Dr. Roberts, the finance team. I know the past 6 months has been real hectic in getting documentation and all the documents we needed submitted. But I just want to say thank you to everyone that was involved in the process. And Ms. Johnson, whether you're the administrator when we get ready to do the audit again, or we have a new administrator, I would definitely encourage that our employees take every available training that is offered so we don't end up in this situation again.
I also like to thank Mr. Davis and his team for putting up with us, because I think I probably woke some people up sometimes with this audit, and when I got frustrated, I let it show, and they were very patient with me. And so I appreciate them actually hanging in there with us. They didn't have to, but they did, to get us through this. But it's still not over yet, because we still have 2023 to do in 2023. Fiscal year 2023 is, a couple of days from being over. So we're going to have to, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy since we got this done. We still have a hurdle to climb, to jump over, and we also have some other, fund balance obligations that were made in 2023 that's going to affect fund balance. So we're just going to see how this turns out. So, and I thank all of you for being patient. I know every council meeting you ask, where's the audit? Where's the audit? And I sounded like a broken record, but I thank y'all for